No one believed a Japanese POW girl would kiss a black American soldier until that night. July 23, 1945, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. 22-year-old Yuki Takahashi stepped down from the military transport truck, her legs trembling from 3 days of travel across the Pacific and half of America. The iron shackles around her wrists felt lighter than the weight of shame pressing on her chest. She had failed her emperor. She had failed her family. She had been captured alive. Around her, 17 other Japanese prisoners shuffled forward in a loose column. Most were women from Okinawa, captured during the final desperate weeks of fighting. Yuki had been trained as a nurse in the Imperial Japanese Army Nursing Corps. She had treated wounded soldiers in caves while American artillery pounded the island into rubble. When the Americans finally overran their position on June 19th, she had expected immediate execution. That was 43 days ago. She was still alive. This fact alone contradicted everything she knew about American barbarity. The camp sprawled across flat Wisconsin farmland, rows of wooden barracks stretching toward distant tree lines. Electric lights burned at every corner, even though the sun still hung above the horizon. Yuki had not seen such casual use of electricity since before the war. In Japan, even Tokyo had been dark since 1942. She forced herself to look at the American soldiers processing the new arrivals. They were different from the Marines who had captured her. These men wore clean uniforms. They moved without the frantic urgency of combat. One soldier, a black man, perhaps 30 years old, helped an elderly Japanese woman down from the truck. His hands were gentle. His face showed no hatred. Yuki looked away quickly. This had to be a trick. Some elaborate cruelty designed to break their spirits before the real torture began. The prisoners were led to a processing building. Inside, American Red Cross workers, all women, waited with clipboards and medical supplies. One approached Yuki with a smile that seemed genuine but impossible. "Welcome," the woman said in broken Japanese. "You are safe now. The war is nearly over." Safe. The word meant nothing. Yuki had been taught since childhood that Americans were demons who would defile Japanese women before killing them. She had heard stories from soldiers who claimed to witness American atrocities in the Pacific. Every Japanese citizen knew that capture meant unspeakable suffering. Yet here she stood, being offered a cup of water by a woman who looked at her with something resembling compassion. Before you continue listening, please let me know, where in the world are you watching from today? Now back to the story. The processing took 2 hours. They were photographed, given prisoner identification numbers, and examined by military doctors. The doctors were professional. They explained each examination in simple Japanese. When they discovered lice in several prisoners' hair, they treated them with delousing powder and apologized for the indignity. Yuki's mind struggled to reconcile what she experienced with what she believed. Perhaps this kindness was reserved for the beginning. Perhaps tomorrow would bring the horrors she expected. As the sun set, the prisoners were led to their barracks. Each woman received clean clothes, a blanket, a pillow, and basic toiletries. The barracks had electric lights, wooden floors, and real beds with mattresses. In Okinawa, Yuki had slept on cave floors for 3 months. She lay on her assigned bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Through the window, she watched American soldiers walking between buildings. One of them was the black soldier from earlier. He moved with quiet dignity, speaking softly to the guards at the gate. Yuki closed her eyes. Tomorrow would reveal the truth. Tonight's kindness was surely just an elaborate prelude to tomorrow's cruelty. It had to be. Yet somewhere deep in her chest, a small doubt began to form. A question she dared not speak aloud, even to herself. What if everything she had been taught was wrong? July 25th, 1945, 5:30 in the morning. Yuki woke burning with fever. Her body ached from the influenza that had infected half the prisoners during the Pacific crossing. In the cave hospitals of Okinawa, such fevers meant certain death. Medicine had run out months before the surrender. Wounded soldiers died from infections that simple sulfa drugs could have cured. Nurses could only offer water and prayers. Yuki tried to rise from her bed. The room spun violently. She collapsed back onto the mattress, her vision darkening at the edges. Around her, other women slept or whispered in small groups. None noticed her distress. She was grateful for this. Showing weakness dishonored the emperor. Footsteps approached outside. The door opened. An American medic entered, a corporal, perhaps 25 years old, with red hair and freckles. He carried a medical bag and moved between beds, checking on prisoners who had reported illness the previous day. He reached Yuki's bed and paused. His hand touched her forehead. His eyes widened. "Jesus," he muttered in English. Then, in halting Japanese, "Very sick. Wait here." He disappeared. Yuki lay motionless, expecting nothing. If they intended to kill her, fever would make it easier. Perhaps they would simply let her die. That would be merciful compared to what she imagined they had planned. The medic returned 5 minutes later with another soldier. This one was older, a lieutenant with gray hair and gentle hands. He examined Yuki with practiced efficiency, checking her pulse, looking into her eyes, listening to her breathing. "Influenza," he said to the corporal. "High fever, probably 104. Get the sulfa drugs and aspirin, and bring water, lots of water." The words were in English, but Yuki understood their meaning from tone and action. They were going to treat her. Actually treat her, not simply let her die. The medic returned with medicine and a canteen of cool water. The lieutenant helped Yuki sit up. His hands supported her shoulders with surprising gentleness. He held the water to her lips while the corporal prepared the medication. "This will help," the lieutenant said in careful Japanese. "You will feel better soon." The sulfa drug tasted bitter. Yuki swallowed it mechanically, her mind reeling from shock rather than fever. These men, these enemies, were saving her life. They used precious medicine on a prisoner. They touched her without violence. They spoke to her like she was human. Over the next 3 days, the medics returned every 6 hours. They brought medicine, water, and bland food that her stomach could tolerate. They changed her sweat-soaked clothes. They monitored her fever with the same care they would show an American patient. By July 28th, Yuki's fever broke. She woke clear-headed for the first time in days. The morning sun streamed through the window. In the distance, she heard American soldiers singing while they worked. The song was cheerful, almost playful. These were not the sounds of cruel masters tormenting prisoners. That afternoon, she walked outside for the first time since her fever started. The camp looked different in daylight. Clean, organized, almost peaceful. Other Japanese prisoners moved freely within their designated area. Some tended small gardens. Others played simple games with rocks and sticks. Near the fence line, Yuki saw the black soldier from her first day. He was talking with another guard, laughing at some private joke. His laughter was genuine, unforced. He looked happy. She had never imagined an American soldier could look happy. In propaganda films, they were always depicted as cruel automatons, mechanical killers without souls. This man laughed like her father used to laugh before the war consumed everything. A question formed in Yuki's mind. one she could not suppress. If Americans were truly monsters, why did they waste valuable medicine on enemy prisoners? Why did they treat her fever when letting her die would have been easier? She had no answer, but the question itself terrified her more than any torture could have, because asking it meant questioning everything. And questioning everything meant her entire world might collapse. The medic who had first discovered her fever walked past. He saw her standing and smiled. "Feeling better?" he asked in broken Japanese. Yuki bowed slightly, the gesture automatic. "Yes, thank you." The words felt strange on her tongue, thanking the enemy. But what else could she say? These men had saved her life. August 2nd, 1945, 2:15 in the afternoon. Yuki sat in the shade of the barracks, watching American soldiers unload supply trucks near the camp entrance. 9 days had passed since her arrival. 9 days of careful observation. 9 days of watching her certainties crumble like paper in rain. The food disturbed her most. 3 meals daily, each one containing more calories than most Japanese civilians had seen in months. White rice, not the substitute grains that had become standard in Japan. Vegetables, fresh and abundant. Meat at least twice weekly. The Americans fed their prisoners better than the Imperial Army fed its own soldiers. Other prisoners noticed, too. Whispered conversations filled the barracks each night. Women who had survived Okinawa's hell now gained weight in captivity. Their hollow cheeks filled out. Their strength returned. This reality contradicted every propaganda broadcast they had heard for 4 years. Yuki tried to maintain her hatred. She reminded herself daily of American crimes, the firebombing of Tokyo, the destruction of Hiroshima, the deaths of millions. But this intellectual hatred struggled against the physical evidence surrounding her. The Americans were either the cruelest deceivers in history or something else entirely, something she had no framework to understand. A shadow fell across her. She looked up. The black soldier stood 3 feet away, his hands holding something wrapped in paper. "Hello," he said in careful Japanese. The accent was terrible, but the effort was genuine. "My name is Eli Jackson. I am from Alabama." Yuki stared at him, unable to respond. Direct conversation with guards was not forbidden, but it felt dangerous. Every interaction with Americans risked further confusion. Eli seemed to sense her discomfort. He smiled gently and held out the paper-wrapped package. "For you," he said. He switched to English, speaking slowly. "It's chocolate from the PX. I thought you might like it." Chocolate. Yuki had not tasted chocolate since 1941. Before Pearl Harbor, her father had sometimes brought home imported sweets from his work at the shipping company. Chocolate had been a rare treasure even then. She accepted the package automatically, her hands moving before her mind could object. The wrapping crinkled in her fingers. She opened it slowly. Inside lay a Hershey's chocolate bar, the wrapper printed with cheerful brown letters. The smell hit her immediately, sweet and rich, and utterly impossible. This was enemy chocolate, made in enemy factories, by enemy workers. Yet it was real. It was here. And Eli Jackson had given it to her without asking anything in return. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Her Japanese was barely a whisper. Eli seemed to understand. He settled into a squat, bringing himself to her eye level. His face was kind, not the manufactured kindness of propaganda, but something genuine and sad. "Because you're far from home," he said in English. Then, in broken Japanese, "Because war is hard. Because chocolate is good." He stood and walked away before Yuki could respond. She sat frozen, the chocolate bar heavy in her hands. Around her, other prisoners stared. They had witnessed the exchange. Tomorrow, gossip would spread through the barracks like wildfire. That night, Yuki broke the chocolate into 12 equal pieces. She shared 11 pieces with the women nearest her bed. She kept one piece for herself, letting it melt slowly on her tongue before sleeping. The taste was everything she remembered. Sweet, rich, impossibly good. But something else came with it. A realization that made her chest tight with fear. If Americans could be kind enough to share chocolate with prisoners, then perhaps they were not demons. And if they were not demons, then what did that make her? What did that make the war? What did that make every sacrifice her nation had demanded? She had been taught that death was preferable to surrender, that Americans would torture captured soldiers, that the emperor was divine and his war was sacred. Every piece of this worldview now felt unstable, undermined by simple acts of medical care and chocolate bars given freely. Yuki curled on her side, pulling the blanket over her head. Outside, American soldiers laughed and talked in their strange language. The sounds were human, normal, unremarkable, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. August 7th, 1945, 10:30 in the morning. Yuki worked in the camp garden, pulling weeds from between rows of tomato plants. The garden was a recent addition, started by prisoners who requested permission to grow vegetables. The Americans had agreed immediately, providing seeds, tools, and a quarter-acre of good soil. Yuki found the work meditative. Her hands remembered her grandmother's garden in Kyoto, the careful attention to each plant, the patience required for growth. Footsteps approached on the gravel path. She looked up. Eli Jackson walked toward her, moving with the same careful dignity she had noticed before. He carried 2 canteens of water. "Hot day," he said in English, then tried Japanese. "Very hot. Need water?" Yuki straightened, wiping soil from her hands. She nodded. Eli handed her 1 canteen. She drank gratefully, the water cool and clean. He drank from his own canteen, then settled onto a bench near the garden's edge. "May I sit for a moment?" he asked. The question was formal, respectful. Yuki appreciated this. She nodded again and returned to her weeding. For several minutes they existed in comfortable silence. Yuki worked. Eli watched the clouds drift across the Wisconsin sky. Finally, he spoke. "I grew up in Alabama," he said in English, speaking slowly so she might understand some words. "Small town. Very poor. My father picked cotton." He made a picking motion with his hands. "Cotton. You understand?" Yuki knew the English word. She nodded. "Life was hard," Eli continued. His voice was soft, almost talking to himself. "White people didn't like black people. Treated us bad. Very bad. My brother was killed. Lynched. You know this word? Lynched?" Yuki didn't know the word. She looked at him, confused. Eli's face darkened with old pain. "Murdered," he said simply. "White men murdered him. No punishment. No justice." Understanding crashed over Yuki like cold water. Eli was describing oppression, injustice, the powerful destroying the weak without consequence. She understood this perfectly. She had seen it in China when Japanese soldiers brutalized civilians. She had tried not to see it, tried to believe the propaganda about liberating Asia, but she had seen it nonetheless. Eli continued speaking, his words flowing like a river finally released from a dam. I joined the army to fight for my country, but my country doesn't fight for me. In the South, I can't eat in the same restaurants as white soldiers, can't drink from the same water fountains. My uniform means nothing there. He laughed bitterly. I fight for freedom in Europe, while my people have no freedom at home. He paused, looking directly at Yuki. His eyes held no anger, only profound sadness. I lost 3 friends in France. Good men. They died for a country that treats them like animals. I watched them bleed out in the mud, calling for mothers who would never see their graves. His voice cracked slightly. And now I'm here, guarding prisoners. And I think, what's the difference? You're the enemy, but we're all just people trying to survive. Yuki's hands had stopped moving. She sat back on her heels, staring at this American soldier who spoke of pain and injustice with such raw honesty. The propaganda had taught her that Americans were united in their evil, that they suffered no internal conflicts, that their society was strong because it was ruthless. But Eli Jackson was describing a broken nation, a place where the uniform meant nothing if your skin was the wrong color, where men fought for ideals their country refused to grant them. Why do you fight? Yuki asked, in careful English. The words felt strange, but necessary. If your country is bad to you, why fight? Eli smiled sadly. Because I still hope. Hope it can be better. Hope my nephew will grow up in a different America. Hope means we keep trying, even when it's hard. He stood slowly, picking up both canteens. You remind me of my sister, he said softly. Same age, same eyes, always watching, always thinking. She works in a factory in Detroit now, making airplane parts. I miss her. He walked away before Yuki could respond. She knelt in the garden, hands covered in dirt, mind reeling from this unexpected confession. Eli Jackson had shared his pain with her, an enemy prisoner. He had shown her his humanity without asking for anything in return. For the first time since her capture, Yuki felt something other than shame and confusion. She felt connection, understanding, the recognition that suffering was universal, that pain crossed all boundaries. That night, she lay awake thinking about Alabama and Kyoto, about brothers and sisters, about hope that survived despite everything. August 10th, 1945, 7:40 in the evening. The incident began with an argument over rice portions. Yuki stood in the mess hall line, waiting for dinner. Ahead of her, a prisoner named Michiko Sato complained loudly to the American servers. The woman was 53 years old, a schoolteacher from Okinawa who had been conscripted as a civilian defense volunteer. She carried herself with rigid dignity, speaking only when necessary, maintaining the stern bearing she had used with students. This portion is insufficient, Michiko said in Japanese, her voice sharp. We are being starved. The American server, a young private who understood no Japanese, smiled and gestured that this was the standard serving. Michiko's face flushed with anger. She pushed her tray back toward him roughly. Rice scattered across the counter. Unacceptable, she snapped. The server's smile disappeared. A corporal moved forward, his hand resting on the baton at his belt. The situation was escalating rapidly. Other prisoners backed away, sensing trouble. Yuki's stomach tightened. She had seen this pattern before. Pride leading to confrontation, confrontation leading to punishment. In the Imperial Army, such defiance would earn severe beatings. She expected the Americans to be no different. Michiko seemed prepared for violence. She stood rigid, her jaw set, ready to accept whatever punishment came. Perhaps she wanted this. Perhaps she needed to prove to herself that Americans were the monsters she had been taught to expect. Before the corporal could act, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Stand down," Eli Jackson said firmly in English. He moved between Michiko and the corporal, his body language calm but authoritative. "I'll handle this." The corporal hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. Eli turned to Michiko. He pulled a small Japanese-English dictionary from his pocket, a worn book he had been carrying for weeks. He flipped through pages, searching for words. "Enough food," he said in broken Japanese, pointing at the dictionary. "Same for everyone. Not punishment. Standard." Michiko stared at him, her face unreadable. Eli tried again, his finger tracing words in the dictionary. "Tomorrow speak to commander. Make complaint formal. Proper way. Now, eat. Peace." He gestured to an empty table. His meaning was clear. Take the food, sit down, address this through proper channels tomorrow. No one needs to be punished tonight. Michiko's rigid stance softened slightly. She took her tray, the rice portion unchanged, and moved toward the table Eli had indicated. The crisis was over. The corporal shrugged and returned to his position. The line resumed moving. Yuki stood frozen, her tray forgotten in her hands. She had just witnessed something impossible. An American guard had de-escalated a confrontation when he could have easily used force. He had protected a prisoner from punishment she had earned through her own defiance. More impossibly, he had done it with kindness, with patience, with a cheap dictionary he kept in his pocket, specifically to communicate better with prisoners he had no obligation to understand. Later that night, Yuki found Eli walking the perimeter path, performing his regular security rounds. She approached hesitantly, unsure of proper protocol. He saw her and stopped. "Hello, Yuki," he said, using her name for the first time. His pronunciation was terrible, but the attempt moved her deeply. "Why?" The question burst from her in English. "Why help her? She was wrong. Rude." Eli smiled sadly. He leaned against the fence, looking up at stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Because she's scared," he said simply. "Because losing your country is hard. Because small acts of mercy matter more than big acts of justice." He pulled out his dictionary again, finding words carefully. "War makes everyone lose. Lose home, lose family, lose hope. I can't give those back, but I can give small kindness, small respect. Maybe that helps." Yuki felt something crack inside her chest. The final barrier of hatred, the last defense against accepting American humanity, crumbled into dust. She had clung to her indoctrination desperately, needing to believe the enemy was evil, because accepting their goodness meant accepting her own nation's lies. But standing here, watching this black soldier from Alabama protect a Japanese schoolteacher from punishment she had earned, Yuki could not maintain the illusion any longer. "Thank you," she said softly in English. Then in Japanese, "You are a good man, Eli Jackson." Eli looked at her for a long moment. Something passed between them in that silence. Recognition. Understanding. The acknowledgement that despite everything separating them, language and nation and war and race, they were both simply humans, trying to navigate impossible circumstances with whatever grace they could manage. "You're welcome, Yuki Takahashi," he said. "Sleep well tonight." He resumed his patrol. Yuki watched him walk away, his silhouette gradually disappearing into the gathering darkness. Above them, stars emerged one by one, the same stars that shone over Alabama and Kyoto, over battlefields and gardens, over all the broken places where people learned that kindness was not weakness, and mercy was not defeat. Something had changed in Yuki that night. Some transformation she could not yet name. But she knew with absolute certainty that tomorrow she would wake different than she had been. The war had taken everything from her, except her humanity. And Eli Jackson, enemy soldier, had helped her find it again. August 15th, 1945, 3:20 in the afternoon. Japan surrendered. The news reached Camp McCoy through radio broadcasts that afternoon. American soldiers celebrated with restrained professionalism. No wild parties, no excessive drinking, just quiet relief that the killing would finally stop. In the prisoner barracks, the reaction was silence. Women sat on their beds, staring at walls, processing the unprocessable. The Emperor himself had spoken on radio, his voice thin and distant, announcing surrender in language so formal most civilians could barely understand it. 4 years of sacrifice, millions dead, cities destroyed, and it had all been for nothing. Yuki felt nothing. The numbness that had protected her through Okinawa's horror returned, wrapping around her heart like cotton. She had lost her country, her purpose, her entire understanding of reality. What remained? That evening, Eli found her sitting alone behind the barracks, watching the sunset paint the Wisconsin sky in shades of orange and purple. He approached slowly, giving her space to send him away if she wished. She didn't. He sat beside her on the grass, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm sorry," he said softly in English. "I know this must be very hard." Yuki nodded. Words felt impossible. Everything she had been raised to believe, every sacrifice she had made, every moment of suffering she had endured, all of it had been wasted on a war her nation could not win. "May I tell you a story?" Eli asked. He pulled out his dictionary, finding words carefully. "About my home." Yuki nodded again. Eli's voice was gentle, almost hypnotic in the fading light. "I grew up on a farm," he said. "Small place. We grew cotton, vegetables. My father was a sharecropper. You know this word?" He made a planting motion. "He worked land owned by a white man. We got very little money. Very hard life." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "My mother sang while she worked. Beautiful songs. Church songs. She told me that singing kept her soul alive when everything else was dying." He looked at Yuki. "She said that no matter how hard life gets, we have to keep something alive inside. Something that's just ours. Something the world can't take." Yuki felt tears forming. She had not cried since her capture. Crying was weakness. But Eli's words touched something deep inside her, some part that had survived despite everything. "What did you keep alive?" she asked in careful English. Eli smiled sadly. "Hope. Even when my brother died. Even when white men beat me for looking at them wrong. Even when the army sent me to guard enemies while my people suffered at home. I kept hope alive." He touched his chest gently. "Right here. Small flame. Never goes out." Over the following weeks, these conversations became routine. Eli would find Yuki during his breaks. They would sit together, sharing stories. Yuki told him about her family in Kyoto, her father who had worked for a shipping company, her mother who had taught tea ceremony, her younger brother who had died in China in 1943. Eli listened without judgment. He never told her she was wrong to grieve for soldiers who had fought against America. He simply acknowledged her pain as real and valid. In return, Yuki learned about Alabama, about cotton fields that stretched to the horizon, about churches where people sang until the walls shook, about a sister named Rose who worked in a Detroit factory, about dreams of becoming a teacher after the war ended. Other prisoners noticed these conversations. Some disapproved quietly. A few, like old Michiko Sato, watched with calculating eyes but said nothing. The Americans noticed too. Some of Eli's fellow guards made comments, nothing overtly hostile yet, but the atmosphere was changing. Private James Harris, another black soldier who worked alongside Eli, pulled him aside one evening. "Be careful, brother," James said quietly. "Some of these white boys don't like seeing you friendly with the prisoners, especially not the pretty ones." Eli nodded, but didn't stop. Something in Yuki's eyes called to him, a kindred pain, the recognition that both of them were caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Yuki felt this pull too. Despite everything, despite the war and the propaganda and the reasonable voice in her head warning against attachment, she found herself thinking about Eli constantly. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her. This terrified her. Feeling anything for an American soldier was betrayal. Feeling something for a black American soldier was unthinkable. Yet the feeling grew anyway, stubborn as weeds in a garden. One evening, as they sat together watching fireflies emerge in the dusk, Yuki spoke the truth she had been avoiding. "I don't know who I am anymore," she said in Japanese, knowing Eli wouldn't fully understand. "Everything I believed was a lie. My country, my emperor, my purpose. Without those things, what am I?" Eli didn't need to understand the words to hear the pain. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand covered hers, warm and solid and real. "You're Yuki," he said simply. "That's enough." August 28th, 1945, 9:15 in the morning. The misunderstanding began with a simple gesture. Yuki was working in the camp garden when Eli approached with his usual friendly smile. He carried something wrapped in cloth. As he got closer, he extended it toward her with both hands. "Gift," he said in broken Japanese. "For you." Yuki's hands moved to accept it automatically. Then she froze. In Japanese culture, accepting gifts with both hands while standing was proper. But the way Eli stood, the way he held the package, the earnest look in his eyes, suddenly felt too intimate, too forward, too much like courtship. She stepped back quickly, her face flushing with confusion and something approaching panic. "No," she said sharply in Japanese. "I cannot. This is not proper." Eli's smile faded. He looked confused, hurt. He held the package awkwardly, clearly not understanding what he had done wrong. Around them, other prisoners had stopped working. They watched this interaction with various expressions. Some looked disapproving. Others seemed curious. Michiko Sato's face showed something close to satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for exactly this kind of scene. "I'm sorry," Eli said in English, his voice tight. I didn't mean to offend. He placed the package on the ground between them and walked away quickly. Yuki stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had hurt him. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with less grace than usual. Later, she unwrapped the package alone. Inside was a book, a Japanese-English dictionary, much nicer than Eli's worn copy. On the first page, he had written in careful English, "So we can talk better. Your friend, Eli." Your friend. The words made her chest ache. That afternoon, Private James Harris found Eli sitting alone behind the motor pool, ostensibly checking tire pressure, but mostly just hiding. "What happened?" James asked, settling beside him. Eli explained the morning's incident. James listened quietly, then sighed. "Brother, you know this can't end well," he said gently. "Even if she liked you back, even if there wasn't a war, you're a black man and she's Japanese. Where do you think that goes?" "I know," Eli said miserably. "I wasn't trying to court her. I just wanted to give her something nice, something to help." "Your kindness looks like something else to her," James said. "Different cultures, different rules. And even if she understood, we got bigger problems. Sergeant Davis has been asking questions about you spending time with prisoners. Says it's inappropriate." Eli looked up sharply. Sergeant Harold Davis was a white officer from Georgia. He made no secret of his belief that black soldiers should know their place. "Let him ask," Eli said quietly. "I'm not doing anything wrong." "No," James agreed. "But wrong and allowed are different things for people like us. You know that." For 3 days, Yuki avoided Eli. When she saw him approaching, she found reasons to be elsewhere. She ate quickly and returned to the barracks. She worked in corners of the garden where his patrol route didn't pass. The avoidance hurt more than the rejection had. Eli found himself watching for her despite knowing he shouldn't. The camp suddenly felt emptier. The work felt heavier. The other soldiers' casual racism, which he had learned to ignore, now grated on his nerves. On the 4th day, Yuki found him sitting on a bench near the fence, reading his old dictionary during his break. She approached slowly, clutching the new dictionary he had given her. "May I sit?" she asked in careful English. Eli nodded, not trusting his voice. She sat beside him, leaving proper space between them. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Yuki opened the new dictionary to a marked page. She pointed to a word she had circled. "Friend." Then she pointed to another word. "Thank you." Then another. "Sorry." Eli felt his throat tighten. He opened his own worn dictionary and pointed to words in sequence. "Not your fault." She pointed to more words. "Different culture, confusing." He pointed back. "I understand. Still friends?" She nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small origami crane, folded from newspaper. She placed it carefully on the bench between them. "In Japan," she said slowly in English, "crane means peace, long life, hope." Eli picked up the tiny paper bird carefully, as if it might break. The wings were perfect, each fold precise despite the rough newsprint. This had taken time, skill, thought. "It's beautiful," he said. "Thank you." They sat together as the sun climbed higher, two people from opposite sides of the world, finding ways to communicate across chasms of culture and circumstance. The misunderstanding had not destroyed their friendship. Instead, It had forced them both to be more careful, more intentional, more aware of the impossible situation they were navigating. But it had also revealed something neither could deny. The space between friendship and something deeper was growing smaller. The feelings both tried to suppress were becoming harder to ignore, and the world around them was watching with increasing suspicion. That evening, Sergeant Davis called Eli into his office. "Jackson," he said coldly, "I'm reassigning you to the motor pool, effective immediately. No more guard duty." "May I ask why, sir?" Davis's smile was thin and cruel. "Because I don't like how friendly you're getting with the prisoners, particularly that Japanese girl. We maintain professional distance here. You seem to have forgotten that." Eli saluted mechanically. Professional distance. As if kindness itself was a violation. As if treating prisoners like human beings was somehow wrong. But he was a black soldier in a white man's army. He had no power to argue. So he simply replied, "Yes, sir," and left. Outside, he found the origami crane still in his pocket. He held it gently, this small paper symbol of everything he was being told to forget. September 7th, 1945. 6:40 in the evening. The temperature had dropped suddenly, bringing the first real hint of Wisconsin winter. Yuki shivered as she walked from the mess hall to the barracks. She wore only the light cotton shirt issued during the summer months. In California, September would still be warm. Here, the evening air carried frost. She had not seen Eli in 4 days. His absence felt like a missing tooth, a gap she kept touching with her tongue despite the pain. Other guards had taken over the patrols near the prisoner areas. When she asked Private Harris about Eli, he had simply said, "Reassigned, motor pool work." The words told her everything. Someone had noticed their friendship. Someone had decided it was inappropriate. Someone had separated them. That night she lay in her bed, wrapped in her thin blanket, still cold. Around her, other women slept or whispered quietly. The barracks stove provided minimal heat. Most prisoners simply endured the discomfort without complaint. A soft knock at the door broke the evening quiet. The ranking prisoner, Michiko Sato, rose to answer it. She opened the door a crack, spoke briefly with whoever stood outside, then turned toward Yuki's bunk. "Takahashi," she said formally. "Someone has left something for you." Yuki rose, confused. Michiko handed her a neatly folded wool coat, army issue but clearly meant for prisoner use. Pinned to it was a small piece of paper with a message written in careful English. "Saw you were cold. Stay warm. A friend." No signature, but Yuki recognized the handwriting from the dictionary inscription. Her fingers traced the letters as warmth that had nothing to do with the coat spread through her chest. Michiko watched this interaction with sharp eyes. "Be careful, child," the older woman said quietly. "People are talking. This kindness from the black soldier will bring trouble for both of you." "He's my friend," Yuki said softly. "Friends do not risk so much for each other across enemy lines," Michiko replied. "Whatever this is, it is more than friendship. And more than friendship is dangerous." But Yuki pulled the coat on anyway. It was warm and smelled faintly of motor oil and something else, something uniquely Eli. She wore it every day after that, a silent acknowledgement of his gesture. 3 days later, she found a way to thank him. During afternoon work detail, she saw Eli working on a truck engine in the open-air motor pool. No guards prevented prisoners from walking near the area during movement between work assignments. She deliberately chose a path that passed close to where he worked. As she walked by, she dropped something small beside his toolbox. She kept walking without breaking stride. Behind her, she heard him pause, heard the small intake of breath that meant he had found it. She had folded another origami crane. This one was made from a piece of cloth torn from her old dress, the one she had been wearing during her capture. She had used thread from the sewing kit to add color, creating tiny red accents on the wings. It had taken 3 days to complete. That evening, as the sun set, Yuki found a small note tucked under the door of the barracks. More careful English handwriting. Same place as before, after dark, if you want. The same place meant the bench near the fence where they had reconciled after the misunderstanding. After dark meant during his night patrol route, which apparently he had been reassigned back to. If you want meant she had a choice. He would not pressure her. At 9:30 that night, Yuki slipped out of the barracks. This was not forbidden. Prisoners could move within designated areas during evening hours. But it felt like transgression anyway. Like crossing a line she could not uncross. Eli was waiting at the bench, sitting in shadow. He stood when he saw her approaching. Neither spoke initially. The night air was cold, but still. Above them, stars blazed in clusters, the Milky Way clearly visible away from city lights. "Thank you for the coat," Yuki said in English. "Thank you for the crane," Eli replied. "I keep it in my pocket. Always." They sat together, looking up at the stars. Eli pointed to Orion, just becoming visible on the eastern horizon. He traced the constellation with his finger, naming stars in English. Yuki pointed to different patterns, giving their Japanese names. Neither fully understood the other's words, but the meaning was clear. The same stars shone on both their homelands. "In Japan," Yuki said slowly, "we tell story about Tanabata, 2 lovers, separated by river in sky." She gestured to the Milky Way. "They meet one night each year. Very sad, very beautiful. Like Romeo and Juliet," Eli said. "Star-crossed lovers. Tragedy." "Yes," Yuki agreed. "But also hope. They never stop loving. Distance does not matter." Eli turned to look at her directly. In the starlight, his face was serious, open, vulnerable. "Yuki," he said softly, "I know this is complicated. I know people are watching. I know there are 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't be friends." He paused. "But sitting here with you, looking at stars, this is the most peace I've felt since the war started." Yuki felt her carefully maintained walls crumbling. She had tried to be practical, tried to remember duty, propriety, the impossibility of their situation. But practical thinking could not erase what she felt when he looked at her, could not deny the warmth that filled her chest when he smiled. "Me too," she whispered in Japanese. Then in English, "Peace. With you. Only with you." They sat together until the guard change at midnight forced them to part. No touching, no dramatic declarations, just 2 people finding comfort in each other's presence under a sky full of stars that belonged to no nation. As Yuki walked back to the barracks, wrapped in the coat Eli had given her, she understood something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer simply friendship. This was something deeper, more dangerous, more impossible. And she no longer wanted to fight it. September 14th, 1945, 8:20 in the evening. The kiss that changed everything began with news of death. Yuki received the letter that afternoon. Red Cross notification. delayed by months of bureaucratic processing and transoceanic mail routes. Her mother had died in March during the firebombing of Tokyo. Her father had died in July from illness and malnutrition. Her childhood home was ashes. She was alone in the world. She read the letter 3 times, each reading making the words more real and more impossible. Everything she had fought to protect, everyone she had hoped to return to, gone. The war had taken her country, her beliefs, her family. What remained? That evening, she walked to the bench near the fence without conscious decision. Her body carried her there automatically, seeking the one source of comfort she had found in this impossible situation. Eli was not there. She sat alone, the letter crumpled in her hand, and finally allowed herself to cry. 4 years of repressed grief poured out in silent sobs. She cried for her parents, for her brother who had died in China, for her nation that had thrown away millions of lives for nothing, for herself, a girl who had lost everything, including her own identity. Footsteps approached. She looked up, tears still streaming. Eli stood 3 feet away, his face creased with concern. He must have seen her from his patrol route, must have recognized distress even in the darkness. "What happened?" he asked gently. She held out the letter with shaking hands. He took it carefully, moving closer to read by starlight. His Japanese had improved through weeks of dictionary study and careful practice, enough to understand the devastating content. "Oh, Yuki," he breathed. "I'm so sorry." He sat beside her on the bench, closer than before, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cold night air. She should move away, maintain proper distance, remember all the rules about propriety and separation. Instead, she leaned into him. Her head found his shoulder. His arm came around her carefully, giving her space to pull away if she wanted. She didn't want. She needed this human contact, this acknowledgement that her pain was real and witnessed. They sat like that for long minutes. Eli said nothing, just held her while she cried. His presence was solid, real, unchallengeable. In a world where everything else had proven false, his kindness remained true. Finally, Yuki's tears slowed. She lifted her head, aware suddenly of how close they were, how improper this was, how much trouble they could both face if discovered. "I'm sorry," she started to say. "Don't," Eli interrupted softly. "Don't apologize for being human." She looked at him then, really looked. His face in the starlight was beautiful. Kind eyes, gentle mouth, features she had memorized over weeks of conversation. This man who had shown her mercy when he owed her nothing, who had treated her with dignity when the world said she deserved none. "Eli," she whispered. "Yes?" She did not plan what happened next. Her body moved before her mind could object. She leaned forward and kissed him. For one frozen moment, everything stopped. The world held its breath. Then Eli's hand came up to cup her face gently, and he kissed her back. The kiss was soft, tentative, carrying 4 years of war and loneliness and impossible hope. It tasted like tears and starlight and the death of old worlds. When they separated, both were breathing hard, eyes wide with shock at what they had done. "Yuki," Eli said, his voice rough. "We can't. This is—" "I know," she interrupted. "Impossible. Forbidden. Foolish." She touched his face with trembling fingers. "But I don't care anymore. Everything I believed was a lie. Everyone I loved is gone. You are the only real thing left in my world. People are watching, Eli warned. There will be consequences. For both of us. Probably worse for me. I know, Yuki repeated. But I am tired of living by rules created by people who would rather see us hate than love. I am tired of being afraid. Eli pulled her close again, his forehead resting against hers. This scares me, he admitted. Not because you're Japanese. Because I'm black, and you're a prisoner, and we're in Wisconsin in 1945. People here don't even accept black soldiers dating white women, much less Japanese prisoners. What we're doing could destroy both our lives. My life is already destroyed, Yuki said simply. You helped me find pieces worth keeping. That is enough. They kissed again, longer this time, less tentative. A declaration that despite everything, despite the impossibility and the danger and the world's certain disapproval, they chose each other. When they finally separated, Eli's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I can't promise this will work, he said. Can't promise we won't face terrible consequences. Can't even promise we'll survive what comes next. I know, Yuki said for the third time. But we can promise to face it together. That is enough. They sat holding hands until midnight, planning nothing, promising everything. Above them, the stars wheeled slowly through their ancient patterns, indifferent to human borders and human wars and human hearts that refused to obey the rules. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight, they had each other. And in that moment, wrapped in the coat he had given her, holding hands with this impossible man under an impossible sky, Yuki felt something she had not felt since Okinawa fell. Hope. September 16th, 1945, 7:15 in the morning. The rumors started before breakfast. Yuki noticed the change immediately. Women who had been friendly now avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when she approached. Even Michiko Sato, who had previously shown grudging respect, now looked at her with cold disapproval. At breakfast, the whispers were unmistakable. Japanese words like shameful and disgraceful and betrayer floated around her like smoke. Someone had seen them. Of course, someone had seen them. In a prison camp, privacy was an illusion. Takeshi Kobayashi, a male prisoner who worked in the camp maintenance detail, sat near Yuki deliberately during the meal. He was 48 years old, a businessman from Tokyo who still clung to pre-war notions of Japanese superiority. Takahashi-san, he said formally, people are talking about you, about the black American soldier. Yuki met his eyes steadily. Let them talk. You shame yourself, Takeshi said, his voice low but intense. You shame all Japanese prisoners. That man is not only American, but black. Do you understand what this means? It means I found kindness in an unexpected place, Yuki replied quietly. It means I chose human connection over hatred. If that shames you, I cannot help it. Takeshi's face darkened with anger, but he said nothing more. The damage was done. By midday, every prisoner in the camp knew about the Japanese nurse who had kissed a black guard. For Eli, the consequences were more immediate and more dangerous. Sergeant Davis called him to the administration building at 8 o'clock. 3 other white officers were present, their faces ranging from disapproving to openly hostile. Jackson, Davis began. We've received reports about inappropriate fraternization with prisoners, specifically with a Japanese woman named Takahashi. Care to explain? Eli stood at attention, his face carefully neutral. In the American South, showing emotion to white men in authority could get you killed. The Army was no different. I have been friendly with several prisoners, sir, he said carefully. Part of my duties includes ensuring their well-being and maintaining camp order. Friendly is one thing, another officer interjected. What you've been doing goes beyond friendly. Multiple witnesses report you giving gifts, having private conversations, spending time alone with this woman. I give no more attention to Miss Takahashi than to other prisoners, Eli lied smoothly. If my actions have been misinterpreted, I apologize. Davis leaned forward, his eyes cold. Let me be clear, Jackson. I don't care what you people do with each other, but when you start sniffing around Japanese girls, that's a problem. It makes us look bad, makes the whole camp look bad. You understand what I'm saying? You people. The casual racism was so normal it barely registered. Eli had heard it his entire life, but combining it with threats about Yuki made his blood boil in ways he had to carefully conceal. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Good. You're officially barred from any duty involving prisoner contact. You'll work maintenance exclusively. If I hear about you near that Japanese girl again, you'll face court-martial. Are we clear? Crystal clear, sir. Eli was dismissed. He walked to the motor pool with his head high and his hands steady. Only when he was alone did he allow himself to lean against a truck and close his eyes. Court-martial meant military prison, dishonorable discharge, the end of any hope for a decent life after the war. For a black man in America, that could mean death by poverty and exclusion. But walking away from Yuki felt like dying too. Private James Harris found him an hour later. Brother, you need to stop, James said without preamble. This thing with the Japanese girl, it's going to destroy you. Davis is looking for any excuse to crush you. Don't give it to him. I care about her, Eli said quietly. I know, but caring doesn't change reality. You're a black soldier. She's an enemy prisoner. Even if this was peacetime, even if you were white, this wouldn't be acceptable. Add in everything else? James shook his head. You're playing with fire. What should I do? Abandon her? Pretend she means nothing? Yes, James said brutally. That's exactly what you should do. Because the alternative is court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and probably worse. You think Alabama is going to welcome home a black soldier who got kicked out for fraternizing with Japanese prisoners? Eli knew James was right, knew every word was true and practical and wise. But wisdom felt like cowardice when he thought about Yuki's face, the way she had looked at him in the starlight, the kiss that had felt like coming home. That evening, he violated direct orders and went to the fence near the prisoner barracks. Yuki was waiting on the other side, her face pale in the twilight. They told you to stay away from me, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. You should listen. This will destroy your life. Probably. They stared at each other across the fence, 6 feet of space and an unbridgeable gulf of race and nation and regulation between them. I'm not sorry I kissed you, Yuki said softly. Neither am I. But perhaps we should— Don't, Eli interrupted. Don't say we should stop. Don't say this was a mistake. Because it wasn't. You're not a mistake, Yuki Takahashi. Tears ran down her face. What do we do? We're careful, Eli said. We're smart. We wait for things to calm down, and then we find a way. What if there is no way? Eli reached through the fence, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers. Then we make one, he said simply. I didn't survive Alabama and France and the whole damn war just to give up on the one good thing I've found. If you want to walk away, I'll understand. But if you want to fight for this, then we fight. Yuki pressed her hand against the fence, her fingers aligning with his on opposite sides of the wire. We fight, she whispered. Above them, the first stars were appearing, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss 2 nights ago. The same stars that would witness whatever came next, consequences and all. September 23rd, 1945, 2:15 in the afternoon. 7 days had passed since the confrontation with Sergeant Davis. Eli worked alone in the motor pool, changing oil in a supply truck. The work was mindless, allowing his thoughts to circle endlessly around the same impossible problem. He loved Yuki. She loved him. And the world they lived in would never accept it. Footsteps approached. Eli looked up, expecting another white officer with more threats. Instead, Sergeant Thomas Miller stood there. Miller was the senior non-commissioned officer in charge of prisoner welfare. A white man from Ohio, 42 years old, with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Jackson, Miller said, walk with me. It wasn't a request. Eli wiped his hands and followed Miller to a quiet spot behind the maintenance shed. Miller lit a cigarette, offered one to Eli. Both men smoked in silence for a moment. I've been watching this situation develop, Miller finally said. You and the Japanese girl, Takahashi. Eli's stomach tightened. Another lecture, another threat. He prepared himself for it. Davis is an idiot, Miller continued, and a bigot. But he's also technically correct. You're violating fraternization rules. Could face court-martial if he pushes it. I know, sir. But here's the thing. Miller took a long drag. In 3 months, maybe 4, this camp closes. Prisoners get repatriated or released. Army shrinks back to peacetime strength. Davis goes back to Georgia. You go wherever you're going. He looked at Eli directly. What happens then is nobody's business but yours. Eli stared at him, not quite believing what he was hearing. I'm not saying I approve, Miller said carefully. I'm not saying society will accept it. I'm saying that if you can keep your heads down for a few more months, there's a path forward. Just not here. Not now. Why are you telling me this? Eli asked. Miller smiled sadly. Because I've watched you treat those prisoners with more humanity than most men show their own families. Because that girl looks at you like you hung the moon. Because love is rare enough in this world without people like Davis crushing it for no good reason. He dropped his cigarette and ground it under his boot. Be smart, Jackson. Don't give Davis ammunition. But don't give up either. The war's over. New world coming. Maybe there's room in it for people like you and her. Miller walked away, leaving Eli standing in stunned silence. An ally. An actual ally in a position of authority. That evening, Yuki experienced her own unexpected support. She sat in the barracks after dinner when Takeshi Kobayashi approached, the older businessman who had condemned her a week ago. She braced herself for more criticism. Instead, Takeshi sat down heavily and sighed. I owe you an apology, Takahashi-san, he said in Japanese. I spoke harshly about your friendship with the American soldier. I was wrong. Yuki stared at him, speechless. My son died in the Philippines, Takeshi continued quietly. fighting Americans. I hated them all, blamed them for everything. But then I watched how they treat us here. The food, the medicine, the respect. He paused. Yesterday, an American medic sat with me for an hour teaching me English, a man whose people my son tried to kill. He showed me nothing but patience. Takeshi looked at Yuki with tired eyes. I realized my hatred was killing me, making me bitter and small. You chose differently. You chose to see the humanity in your enemy. That takes more courage than I had. It doesn't feel like courage, Yuki said softly. It feels like surrender. Perhaps the bravest thing we can do after losing everything is to remain capable of love, Takeshi replied. Your American soldier, Jackson. He is a good man. I have watched him, how he treats all prisoners with equal dignity, how he defends those who cannot defend themselves. He smiled slightly. If my daughter had survived the war, I would hope she might find someone who looks at her the way that man looks at you. Yuki felt tears forming. Acceptance from Takeshi meant more than she had realized. He represented the old guard, the traditional values she had been raised with. His blessing felt like permission to hope. That night, she found a way to pass a message to Eli through Private Harris. Just 4 words written on a scrap of paper. We have friends now. The next morning, Eli found another origami crane tucked into his toolbox. This one was different. Made from red and white paper somehow acquired or created. The colors of both their flags woven together into something new. He carried it in his pocket constantly, a reminder that even in impossible situations, people found ways to bridge unbridgeable gaps. That hope persisted, despite everything. Sergeant Miller continued to quietly protect them. He adjusted patrol schedules so Eli could occasionally work near prisoner areas without suspicion. He ignored reports from other soldiers about brief conversations. He became their shield against Davis's worst impulses. Other allies emerged. A few progressive-minded soldiers who saw the relationship not as scandal, but as proof that the war's hatred could be overcome. Several female prisoners who watched Yuki's transformation and understood that love was not betrayal, but survival. The opposition remained strong. Davis watched constantly for violations. Some prisoners still viewed Yuki as shameful. Some soldiers viewed Eli as threatening their racial hierarchy. But now, for the first time, Yuki and Eli were not alone. They had allies. They had time, and they had each other. In the gathering darkness of late September, as autumn began turning leaves and the war's end felt more real each day, hope seemed almost possible. Almost. November 7th, 1945, 10:30 in the morning. The announcement came without warning. Camp McCoy would close by December 15th. All Japanese prisoners would be processed for either repatriation to Japan or, in exceptional cases, supervised release into American custody. Each prisoner would face individual review by military authorities. Yuki stood in the administration building 3 weeks later, facing a panel of 3 officers. Sergeant Miller sat to one side as observer. The questions were direct and thorough. Ms. Takahashi, you have no living family in Japan, is that correct? Yes, sir, Yuki replied in careful English. You were conscripted as a military nurse, not a volunteer combatant? Correct, sir. You've shown exemplary behavior during your captivity. No disciplinary issues. You've learned English, participated in work programs. The officer paused. Several staff members have written recommendations on your behalf, including Sergeant Miller here." Yuki glanced at Miller. He gave the slightest nod. "Given your circumstances, you're eligible for supervised release. Sponsorship by an American citizen or organization, employment verification, regular check-ins with authorities." The officer looked at her directly. "Do you wish to return to Japan or remain in the United States?" The question hung in the air. Return to a Japan that no longer existed, to ashes and starvation and shame. Or stay in America, the enemy nation that had shown her more kindness than her own country ever had. "I wish to stay," Yuki said quietly. "If permitted." The interview concluded. She walked outside into cold November sunshine. Eli waited by the fence, officially on his lunch break. They could not speak openly, but their eyes met across the distance. 2 weeks later, the paperwork came through. The Methodist Church in Madison, Wisconsin, had agreed to sponsor her. They would provide housing and help her find work. She would report monthly to immigration authorities. She was free. On December 14, 1945, Yuki walked out of Camp McCoy wearing donated civilian clothes and carrying a small bag containing everything she owned. The origami cranes she had made, the dictionary Eli had given her, a few letters from other prisoners. Her entire life fit in one bag. Eli had been discharged 3 days earlier. Officially, their paths had separated. Camp records showed no connection between them beyond standard guard-prisoner interactions. But Eli stood waiting at the Madison bus station when Yuki arrived. He wore civilian clothes that hung slightly loose on his frame. His face broke into a smile when he saw her. "Miss Takahashi," he said formally for any observers. "Welcome to Madison. I understand you're being sponsored by the Methodist Church. I work nearby. Perhaps I can show you around." "That would be kind, Mr. Jackson," Yuki replied, matching his formality. They walked through Madison's downtown, maintaining proper distance, speaking carefully. To observers, they were simply a black man and a Japanese woman, both outsiders in their own ways, navigating a city still adjusting to peace. They reached Lake Mendota as the sun began setting. The water stretched out before them, gray and cold and beautiful. No one else was nearby. Eli reached for Yuki's hand. She took it without hesitation. "This won't be easy," Eli said quietly. "People will stare. Some will say terrible things. There are still laws in some states against interracial marriage. We'll face discrimination everywhere we go." "I know," Yuki said. "But I did not survive Okinawa and imprisonment and the death of everything I knew just to live a safe, small life. I survived to build something new, something better." "I love you," Eli said simply. "I have since that night under the stars. Maybe before." "I love you too," Yuki replied. "You showed me that hope survives everything, even war, even hatred, even impossible circumstances." They stood together, watching the sun set over water that looked like the Pacific, but wasn't. In a city neither had chosen, but both would call home. In a country still learning what peace meant after 4 years of war. Around them, Madison prepared for its first peacetime Christmas. Lights appeared in windows. People hurried home to families. The world continued spinning, indifferent to two people whose love defied every rule and expectation. But Yuki and Eli had learned something in that prison camp in Wisconsin, that the world's indifference could be a blessing, that being invisible meant being free. that love required no permission from anyone except the two people brave enough to choose it. "What happens now?" Yuki asked. Eli squeezed her hand gently. "Now, we build a life, find work, make friends who accept us, start over in a world that's starting over too." "Together?" "Always together." They turned away from the lake as the last light faded. Two people walking hand in hand into an uncertain future. A Japanese woman who had lost everything except her humanity. A Black American man who had survived a war that tried to convince him he was less than human. Together, they carried forward the most revolutionary act possible in a world exhausted by hatred. They loved across every boundary that should have kept them apart. They chose hope when despair was easier. They built a future when the past would have been simpler. Behind them, Camp McCoy was closing forever. The barracks would be torn down, the fences removed, the guard towers demolished. Within a year, nothing would remain except empty fields and memories. But the love that had grown there between Yuki Takahashi and Eli Jackson would last a lifetime. It would weather every storm, survive every challenge, prove that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion could bridge the widest divides. No one had believed a Japanese prisoner of war girl would kiss a Black American soldier, but she had. And in that kiss lay the promise of a better world. A world where love required no permission, where humanity transcended nationality, where two people from opposite sides of history could walk hand in hand into the future they chose to build together. The war was over. Their life together was just beginning. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.